Hey, welcome back. My name is Dan, and it's time for another quick Q&A. Oh, well, okay, not that quick, but it's time for another Q&A because you guys are asking too many questions and I can't keep up. There have been like 20 or 30 new questions that have come up since I recorded the last one, which just, whatever. But I'm gonna try to answer some more of you guys' animation questions today. Forget it, you guys know what's going on. So, okay, let's answer some questions. Here we go. How crucial is attending school for animation in getting a job in animation? Not actually that crucial. Really, like, animation is like any other art, craft style profession where your work speaks for itself. If you manage to self-teach yourself into being a fantastic animator and your work shows that, then employers will want to hire you because they will want you to make animation for them. Really, like, school can help you get to that place pretty quickly, and it can also give you a lot of connections and maybe some other just advantages here and there, but really, your work will speak for itself. The quality of your work is way more important than the degree you have. As a student, I have yet to decide whether to focus on animation or modeling. My biggest obstacle is negative self-talk during practice. I'll boot up Maya, I'll try to create something, and then I'll start thinking to myself about how horrible it looks and how I'll probably never be able to do this sort of thing with anything resembling skill. This really gets in the way of me ever actually getting anything done. Have you ever dealt with a mental block like this? And if so, what advice can you give to somebody dealing with something similar? I don't know that I've dealt with a mental block specifically like the one you're facing right now, but I think every artist does deal with a block at some point. For your specific case, I know it's not the most helpful advice in the world, but I would just recommend committing yourself to finishing the thing you're working on no matter how you feel about it. And like, don't feel like you have to finish it to a point where you're happy with it, just get it to a point where you feel like, okay, this is done. And then move on to the next thing and just like set the old thing to the side, put it on the shelf, you're done with it, you finished it, good, be proud of yourself, and then move on to the next thing. Because it's all practice, and the only way you get to a place that you're happy with is holding yourself to a high standard, which it sounds like you do, but also you just need to keep on working and creating and getting more experience and practice in. So I know you may not be able to force yourself into being happy with the quality of the work you're creating yet, but I would just recommend doing the best you can to force yourself to at least keep working on it. Because the more you work on it, you will get better, I promise. What are all the programs you use? For animation specifically, Maya is the program that I've done the most work in. When I was working at Pixar, they've got their own proprietary thing, but yeah, for the rest of the time, Maya seems to be the industry standard in most places. We've seen a lot of really well-animated games on the show, but what about flipping that around and showing some poor or just downright bad animation? Often people learn from seeing where and how things went wrong in my experience. In my experience too, and I agree. Part of the problem is that there aren't a lot of high-profile modern games that actually have terrible animation. There are some, and more often there are games that just have kind of mediocre animation, and I'm going to try to talk about those too, or at least point out in games with mostly good animation where there's an animation that is weaker, or not as good. And I may find some games that have some bad animation and try to break down why, just to give you guys an example, because I do agree with what you say, that seeing things done poorly can sometimes serve as better learning examples, but I will try to find some and find ways to incorporate them in. In games like the Mass Effect series, the same scene can have many different characters or differences in script based on the player's in-game choices. What challenges do animators face in these types of games, and what tricks can they take to make it easier for them? So, I would go into answering this right now, but I am planning... The thing I'm planning after the 12 Principle series, after the Final Fantasy series, is a set of videos, and it's gonna be forever before I get to this, given my rate of speed, but the next thing I'm wanting to do is a series on games that have conversation systems, and the animation in those dialogue tree systems. So stuff like the BioWare games, the Telltale games, The Witcher especially, and several other ones that I can't think of right now. So I'm gonna get way more in depth into that stuff in that series later on. What's the reason you transitioned from animation for movies to animation for games? Mostly because the movie animation studio I was working at shut down, so I had to look for something else, and I wasn't super happy with the other film animation jobs available at that specific time. And I had been interested in getting into game animation at some point anyway, so I just kind of figured that was the opportune time. Really, a lot of the other movie animation jobs available to me at that moment were more in the like blockbuster film visual effects scene, and not only is that a little bit less interesting to me right now, but it's also a kind of rough market in general, like not a that industry is going through some problems, so I decided to go for games instead, and I'm happy I did. I've just started my career as an animator, and coincidentally, I also started watching extra credits. Ever since you mentioned you were an animator, I've been wondering, are you actually come on, man. How does outsourcing animation for movies or TV or games work? And is game animation also heavily outsourced? It depends on where you're working, but yes, outsourced and remote animation work does definitely happen from time to time, usually when the project needs to pull in some additional help, but doesn't want to be hiring additional animators on full time. But it depends on the project, but it does happen. What advice can you give on using vector animation in games? Like, what are the benefits and drawbacks to using vector animation over more traditional hand-drawn animation? I hesitate to give an answer to this one just because I have no experience in either hand-drawn or vector animation in games. If anybody is watching this who does, if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment, maybe giving a at least semi-useful answer, a better answer than I can give right now, that would be awesome. Do you believe that you can succeed at becoming an animator anywhere, or do the jobs tend to pull animators to specific locations? Like, does it depend on whether it's for video games or movies? Generally, as an animator, you're gonna need to be ready to move. There are animation jobs scattered around a little bit, but the animation work does tend to congregate in a handful of main hubs around the, I'm talking specifically of North America here. I'm not sure about elsewhere in the world, but if you're in North America, then the animation market does tend to be in cities like several cities in California, Seattle, Austin, Texas, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. It does tend to gravitate towards city areas, and you're probably gonna need to be comfortable with moving somewhere for those jobs, unfortunately, just to make it easier to get work and to get other work if the work you're in falls through. It can already be pretty difficult to find work in this industry just because of how competitive it is and how unstable the market can sometimes be. And to severely limit the jobs you can apply for based on your location is gonna make life pretty hard for you. Any common mistakes you see made, or maybe not mistakes, but pet peeves of yours? Let me think. I do get irritated sometimes seeing really cliched or tropey performances or animations. Like situations where the animator clearly went for the first, most obvious idea that popped into their head and didn't spend any more time thinking about other ideas or other interesting ways to go about a performance or a problem. It's not like I'm an incredible animator myself or anything. Like, I still make all the mistakes I see other people make too, so like, we're all learning, we're all getting better. I can't get too mad about it. Will you do a video where you're in an animation program examining something animated? I'm assuming you're meaning like in the animation software itself. I could. Maybe down the line sometime I will. I'll think about it. I'd have to have kind of like something specific I'm wanting to show you guys about that process, or I don't know, if I have an idea for something like that, then yes, but I'll have to have an idea for it first. How do you give useful criticism to fellow animators showing you their work? Well, first of all, definitely try to be constructive with your criticism. You don't want to be just like a jerk to them. You want to give them something that they can actually use and learn from. I find that in most cases when you're critiquing somebody's creative or artistic work, it's good to find at least something to compliment about the work as well. Like, let them know if something about it is working so that they can know to keep that or push that further. It kind of depends on the relationship you have with the creator, but if you do see something in their work that's not working, try to pinpoint what about it isn't working, which can be hard sometimes, and it may take the two of you studying it for a while to try to kind of find the problem and see something. Just try to be able to provide fresh eyes for somebody who has been staring at that animation for hours on end. Oh, also, this is something to be really cautious about, and I find myself stumbling into this trap all the time. Try to be aware of whether or not the thing that you are suggesting they change would make it better or just make it different. Because if it's just gonna make it different, like if you're just proposing your idea as opposed to their idea and they're about of equal quality, that's not super useful, and you're kind of squashing their own creative idea, and that's no good. So if you catch yourself starting to suggest something that's not necessarily a better idea, or something you're not even sure really is a better idea, maybe back off of that suggestion until you're sure. How would you come up with animations for things when the source material is nearly inaccessible, like for animating extremely foreign aliens or historical fighting styles? What means does an animator have to gauge their accuracy after they've been staring at the same 600 frames for 2 weeks? Well, if you're trying to recreate something based in history, then yeah, it's important to do as much research as you can and try to stay as true to that as you are able to. if you find it impossible to find any source material for something historical, then you may just have to give it your best educated guess or come up with something original that feels right. And that can be a little bit of a shaky path to tread, but sometimes it's the only option you have available to you. But if you're animating something invented or made up, like weird, crazy aliens or something that no one has seen and that there is no technically accurate source material you have to stick to, then you can just do pretty much whatever you want. So long as you can make it feel believable, like someone else can look at that thing and say, oh wow, that's really cool and that kind of makes sense, then yeah, the sky's the limit. If you can sell it to an audience and they totally believe it, then well done. We often hear about bits of art or code being created but then not used in a game. How often do bits of animation not make it into the final game? I think this happens pretty frequently, actually, because animators will be working on stuff for games that are still in development and still being figured out, and a lot of times there will be systems that are proposed or that sound like good ideas early on in development, which later on, as the schedule moves forward and certain systems may need to get cut for time and things like that, a lot of the animations the team may have built may not necessarily be useful anymore, or they may just not have room for them or time to implement them or whatever the case. But yes, I suspect most any game will have had some animation made for it that didn't make it into the final product. I think it's just kind of how the iterative nature of game development works. When you animate a character for a long time in either a film or a game, do you feel like you really get to know that character? Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like if you have an actor who has been performing a character for a long time, nobody knows that character better than they do, because they've been living in that character's head for a long time. And like, it's the same for animators as well. I know some animators who've been working on Toy Story characters for years and years, and they know Woody and Buzz Lightyear like the back of their hands. And they can tell you instantly when looking at somebody's animation of Woody or Buzz whether that feels like them. They can talk at length about what's going on in those characters' heads, and they can tell you instantly if your animation of those characters is staying true to those characters or is on model or not. So yeah, definitely, you will absolutely become very familiar with a character if you've been animating them for a while. Is there any new animation tech that excites you, or what kind of tech would you like to see in the future that would help you as an animator? From Rasmus Jansen, gameplay and animation programmer on Tom Clancy's The Division. Hey, congratulations! I hear that's doing really well for you guys. Good job. Animation tech. This may be a little bit pie in the sky, and it may also just be because the gaming news is filled with VR information right now, but in the long term, I wonder how intuitive it would be to be able to animate a character in VR, like to actually move their rig around in virtual 3D space. That, like, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be as intuitive as it seems in my head, but when I picture it, it seems like it could be kind of nice. I don't know, I'm still kind of familiarizing myself with current animation tech. I've only been in games for a couple of years now, so still learning, still feeling this industry out. What animation or art school did you attend, and are there any that you would recommend? I ended up going to several, actually. I started out in a small startup CG digital media program at the University of Georgia. I spent a little bit of time at Savannah College of Art and Design, but it just wasn't quite the right fit for me at the time, although that is where the early seeds of extra credits started, so I'm very glad I went there for that reason. But I ultimately ended up at an online trade school called Animation Mentor, which I would definitely recommend to just about anybody who wants to get into 3D animation. It is fantastic. If you're wanting to go to a 4-year school, then Savannah College of Art and Design is really good. I would recommend looking into that one. Cal Arts is really good, Ringling is really good, and what's the other one? Sheridan, up in Toronto. I can't remember where it is. It's in Canada. Sheridan in Canada is also really good. There's a bunch of good animation schools. I talk about it in our So You Want to Be an Animator episode, so you can maybe find some more detail in there. What is the best method of getting into the industry? Say you've got a degree from a technical college or something that's accredited and you know your stuff, but you don't actually know anybody in the industry. I would just say apply to as many job openings as you can find. Just every opening you see, go ahead and apply to it. Send in your reel, send in your resume. If your work is good enough, chances are some of those recruiters are going to notice you. Even if you don't have any connections at the studio or anything like that, your work will speak for itself, and your work is what's going to open the doors for you. What would animators or yourself like game designers to know about animation? Ooh, good question. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of game designers who are very good at talking with and coordinating with animators, actually. Like, they may not know as much about animation as I do, but they know enough about how our jobs interact that they are able to communicate well with me and ask for and give me the kind of design information I need to do my job. I guess it really depends on the designers and the hierarchy of power at the studio, but one thing I would definitely recommend to designers when working with animators is to give the animator some creative space to surprise you. Hi Dan, do you know of any places to look for animation jobs? Is there a specific site for animation, or is it just a case of looking on creative job sites and hoping you get lucky? Thanks, from Aiden. Aiden, probably. Well, if you're looking for game animation jobs, one very helpful resource is a website called GameDevMap.com, which allows you to look at any city and see a full list of all the game developers located in that city and links to their websites and everything. It's super helpful. As for other jobs, my recommendation would be to do a little bit of research to see what studios are out there in the field you're interested in, and start just gathering together a list, checking out their websites, and seeing how many of them are hiring. How much work goes into custom, highly situational death animations that occasionally appear in games? And in your opinion, is the impact on the player for specific animations for deaths that could be done generically and are highly context-specific worth that amount of effort? Such as, like, specific enemies that only appear in a single level, thus missable by many players? Like, I think some of the Crash Bandicoot games had some very specific death animations, for example. Like, really situational death animations can be very memorable, and they can be a part of the game that the player remembers for a long time, like Resident Evil 4 and Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot, like you said. Jak and Daxter doesn't have specific death animations, but they have specific, like, little game over screens where Jak gets up in your face no, not Jak, Daxter, where Daxter gets up in your face and yells at you, stuff like that. And it is a memorable, cool little bit of detail to add to the game. It really all just depends on what your schedule allows, and is that sort of feature more memorable or more important to the game than something else that you could be creating with that time? That's really the important question for any kind of task or feature in a game. Like, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck? Is this feature cool enough or important enough that it's worth spending a bunch of hours on that we could be spending on this other feature? Which one's more important? Like, it always comes down to that. Hi Dan, have you ever tried animating a rigged 2D character? If so, what are your thoughts on this compared to traditional 2D animation and rigged 3D characters? I've not actually had the opportunity to do this before, although I kind of would like to try at some point if I ever get that opportunity. Seems like it could be fun and challenging. I'm sure there would be a lot of challenges to it that I can't even really imagine or picture before getting into it, but yeah, that'd be cool. How do you find the balance between functionality and the look and feel of an animation? Usually just through a lot of iteration, honestly. What is the easiest and hardest part of the body to animate? Fingers, eyes, mouth, something else? I would say that the hardest is probably the fingers, or at least the most complicated. Like, hands and fingers have a whole lot of joints to them, and they can do a lot of complicated motions and hit a lot of complicated poses, but they're really important because they're one of the more expressive parts of the body, so you're really, like, making the hands and fingers look good is going to make an animation look way better. Eyes are even more important, but they're also a lot easier. Like, they're much less complex in terms of movement. Mouth is somewhere in between. Like, depending on how complex the rig is, getting really precise, nice mouth expressions can take a while, and lip sync can be really tedious. But I wouldn't put it quite as important as the eyes and fingers, but still, yeah, fingers are the worst. How much do you work with modelers and riggers as a game animator? For example, do you ever have to say, hey, I need an extra bone here or a change in the model here? You will probably have to do some interaction with the modelers and riggers as an animator. Maybe not if you're at a huge studio, but in most situations, I think you'll interact with them pretty frequently, especially the riggers. Because the riggers are going to be the guys building the rig that you are using, and a lot of the time they're wanting to make sure that what they build is useful to you, so they will build the rig and then they'll hand it to you and the rest of the animators and say, hey, play around with this. Is there anything it's missing that you need, or is there anything that's broken and not working, or is there anything you wish this did? And I will say right now, working with someone who builds great rigs is just the best. I highly recommend it. And if you work with a rigger who makes great stuff, just appreciate them every day. What are some of the common causes of the animation bugs we see in games? Honestly, I think almost any animation glitch you see in a game ultimately boils down to the fact that games are very complicated. They are built of thousands of different moving parts that can sometimes interact in troubling, not working ways. And animation systems alone can be big, complicated engines of just tons of moving parts. So it's like, as someone coming from film, where I could just animate a thing to look exactly how I wanted it to a camera, and have it look that way every single time, figuring out how to make something look nearly as good when it's composed of a bunch of different pieces of animations that could play in any order or switch to a different animation at any time depending on what the player wanted to do. It's a very complicated problem, and I am incredibly impressed by any animation teams that manage to do a convincing job of it. Dan, as a game animator, are you responsible for lighting in the scenes you contribute to, or is lighting handled by another person on the team? Also, is there more design club in the works? I'm a big fan. To the design club question, yes, Dan Jones and I are working on a big set of those right now, actually. But for the first question, lighting, no, I am a terrible lighter, so it's good that I have no involvement whatsoever with the lighting done. That is actually usually done by environment artists, maybe some tech artists. It kind of depends on how the workload is handled and shared on the team, but no, much more capable people handle the lighting in the scenes. And thank goodness, because, yeah. My drawing skills are really low. I would say like 2 out of 5. Can I still be a 2D animator without knowing how to draw? A fan from Brazil. Hello, fan from Brazil. I guess it depends on what kind of 2D animation you do. Like, maybe if you're working with certain areas of Flash or vector-based 2D animation, you could get away with it. But not being able to draw in most forms of 2D animation, I think is probably going to end up being a pretty big limiting factor for you. So if that's the kind of animation you want to do, I would definitely put a lot of work into increasing your drawing skills as much as you can, just because it'll make your life easier. How do you do it? Extra credits, extra history, extra play, the animation videos, work, family, social life, gaming, conventions. You assume I have all of these things. Your own projects and a million other things. What's your secret to being so productive? My secret is to mostly work and not do anything else, which is not a very good secret, and I don't know if I'd recommend it to everybody, but that's where I'm at right now. So I mostly just work, and I mean, for one, I've got a lot more people helping me than I did when I first started this out, so like, I could not be doing all of these shows by myself. I'm surrounded by lots of great artists and people who are helping me produce the show and edit the show, and just, yeah, I'm fortunate to work with a lot of great people. But even as it is, I just work almost every waking hour. But I get to work on cool stuff, and it's cool stuff that a lot of people watch, which is a pretty rare blessing. So I'm kind of a mind that I can have free time later. I should really focus on this cool thing now, if that makes sense. How do you keep from overextending yourself by limiting the quality of your work to a level that's feasible given your time constraints? How do you fight the urge to keep making little tweaks and improvements that you don't have time for but individually seem so easy and so beneficial that you can't justify not putting in that little bit of extra effort? How can you feel satisfied with an animation you've completed that meets the standards of the product, but where you see obvious room for improvement and you want to focus on it more so it can meet your own standards and let you be proud of your work? Boy, you're asking a very good and hard question, because I think a lot of animators share that feeling. A lot of creative people probably share that feeling when they're having to work under deadlines. I think it's important to develop the ability to prioritize, to be able to choose your battles and know when you just need to get something to a point where it is good enough and move on for the overall good of the project. Because, I mean, yes, you could put in the extra time to push those individual animations an extra 5 or 10%, and they would look better for it, but then you've spent that extra time and you have possibly limited the number of animations you can create overall for the project, which may end up harming the project in some way. Or alternatively, in order to add that extra 10%, you are working a lot of extra hours and exhausting yourself and possibly reducing the quality of your work overall, or reducing your ability to work to your best ability, and thus resulting in a lower quality out to time invested in ratio, if that makes. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tired, so I don't know if that sentence makes sense. But yeah, it's an important skill to be able to cut yourself off when you have to. But I think it is also at the same time very good that you have that high standard, that you want to push something and make it better. And I think if you can develop the ability to know when is the time to choose your moment and get the most bang for your buck by really putting in that extra 10%, you will hopefully be able to get the best of both worlds and still sleep. Really, don't exhaust yourself. Like, do not burn yourself out. Would you say that animating is more of a creative or more of a technical skill? I would say it's more of a creative one. It requires some technical knowledge. Oh, okay, no. It can be a very technical process overall. Like, the software I work in to create 3D animation is very complex, and all the modeling and rigging work that goes into the characters that I animate is also very complex and requires a lot of technical skill. But ultimately, the craft of animation, the kind of thing that the 12 Principles describes, is a craft and a creative one. And technical skill alone is not going to make you a great animator, if that makes sense. And with that, I think I'm going to call it for this Q&A episode. Thank you guys very much for watching, and thank you for all the great questions. I'm sorry if I did not get to yours. I will eventually do some more of these if you guys are still enjoying them. Let me know. I will see you folks then.